So good to have you join us today. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Lee-Jun in Seoul. Coming up on today's edition of Business Daily. Faced with retirement, many Koreans have started new businesses to make a living. But latest data show there's a very slim chance they will survive down the road. The world's biggest economies failed to include a pledge to keep global trade free and open after differences emerged with an increasingly protectionist U.S. government. We'll sit down with an expert to talk about this. Korea's benchmark Kospi shot up, hitting the highest level in over 5 years. And this comes as former President Park Geun-hye arrived for questioning at the prosecutor's office this morning. For more, we have our Lee Ju-young on the phone with us. So Ju-young, I hear that the Kospi surpassed the 2,180 mark today.
Yes, that's right. During midday trading, the Kospi surged by 1.1% from the previous day, zipping past 2180, the highest level in 23 months. Foreign and institutional investors led the rally, both as net buyers on the market. Most large caps also traded higher, with Samsung Electronics gaining nearly 1.5%, while Hyundai Motor jumped over 9%. At the closing bell, the benchmark Kospi surged nearly 1% from the previous day to hit a 5-year, 8-month high. The tech-heavy Kosdaq also closed up 0.1% at 609.73. Over at the foreign exchange counter, the Korean won closed the trading day weaker at 1,120.31 against the greenback. This has been Lee Ju-young for Business Daily.
And good news on the trade front as Korea's exports are keeping their recovery momentum. Korea Customs Service says the country's outbound shipments came to $27.3 billion during first 20 days of March, up almost 15% on year. Korea's exports have been on an upward trend since November of last year, putting an end to nearly 2 years of decline. The rise in exports was led by increased shipments of petroleum products and semiconductors. By country, exports to Vietnam rose over 43% and to China 16%. Imports rose nearly 30% during the same period to $26.6 billion. With that, the trade surplus came to $760 million. Korea has lifted a sales ban imposed on some chicken imports from Brazil following revelations that several meat packers in the country has sold tainted and even rotten meat products in exchange for bribes. The Seoul government obtained documents listing the 21 processing plants involved and the destination of their exports, which came to some 30 countries but didn't include Korea. As a result, the Agriculture Ministry lifted the sales suspension on the Brazilian chicken meat, but decided to tighten inspections on already imported and to-be-imported products from the country. The Ministry of Food and Drug Safety said it will maintain its higher goods inspection ratio of 15%, up from 1%, and speed up plans to conduct on-site reviews of export plants in Brazil. Korea's duty-free stores are feeling the heat from China's apparent economic retaliation against the deployment of THAAD on the Korean peninsula. According to industry sources on Tuesday, sales at Lotte duty-free dropped 25% during this past weekend from a year ago. It's a stark contrast to the 20% increase it has seen so far this year. The sharp decline comes after China ordered its travel agencies to stop selling tour packages to Korea beginning March 15th. This is worrisome as Chinese tourists make up about 70 to 80% of sales at duty-free stores. Shilla duty-free also saw sales fall 20% during the same period, while Galleria also saw sales tumble 30% on year since the 15th. Industry officials fear the impact will be greater next month, as there are still Chinese tourists that made their reservations prior to the travel tour ban. Many Koreans jump into the restaurant industry after having faced early retirement or dealing with a lack of desirable jobs. But a new survey shows that those who do also have a 1 in 4 chance of continuing their business 10 years down the line. Our Eunice Kim maps out the details.
The Labor Ministry's Korea Employment Information Service conducted an analysis of some 6,300 businesses that launched in 2005 and tracked their performance over a 10-year period. Looking at them across the board, on average, about half were still open for business in their 6th year, while in their 10th year, only 38% remained. Among the sectors that had a low survival rate were restaurants. Only 1 in 4 businesses in the food and hospitality industries were still around a decade later. Worse off were companies dealing financial and insurance services, as well as real estate at around a 20% survival rate. These types of ventures, while easy to begin thanks to their smaller scale, have a tendency to be sensitive to economic fluctuations. In fact, nearly half didn't reach their 4-year mark, with their chances falling dramatically if they employed 10 or fewer staff. On the other hand, health and welfare services topped the sectors that had more success, surviving the 10-year stretch, followed by firms dealing with sewage and waste. Businesses in construction and agro-fisheries also came in the 40% range. Hospitals and pharmacies require more expertise and capital to begin, but see their returns in longevity. Welfare services brought in a steady flow of income with the government's launch of long-term elderly care insurance in 2008. Companies that had outlasted the 10-year mark saw their staff on average double. With the onset of technological advances, experts are urging the government to shift their policy focus from simply encouraging job creation to policies that aim to extend the life of a company. Eunice Kim, Business Daily.
The financial leaders of the G20 economies, including the U.S., China, Mexico, and Germany, held 2 days of tough discussions in the German town of Baden-Baden. But the meeting wrapped up with a break in a decade-long tradition of endorsing open trade. And we take a look at what impact this might have on the Korean economy.
We will resist all forms of protectionism. The G20 finance ministers removed this long-standing public vow for free trade at their gathering in Germany over the weekend. Instead, members settled on the phrase, quote, working to strengthen the contribution of trade to our economies. This comes after U.S. Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin is said to have opposed its inclusion, despite a push from the majority of other finance ministers. Experts say dropping the commitment reflects major disagreements among global economies over one of the key principles that has supported the world economy for years. And there are now greater concerns that such diluted language may spell more trouble for export-dependent countries like Korea. A blow to Korea's exports would further hurt the economy already struggling with low consumption. Adding to these concerns, China has been stepping up its economic retaliation against Seoul for its deployment of THAAD. So what can Korea do to reduce potential risks stemming from increased protectionist sentiment?
And to tell us more about this, Professor Yang Jun-seok from the Catholic University of Korea joins us in the studio today. So good to see you.
Happy to be here.
So like we heard in the report just now, the G20 countries dropped the pledge to avoid all forms of protectionism. Now, why so? And also, what could this mean for the global economy?
Okay, well, it's quite shocking because whenever you have a meeting like this with people, high-level ministers from advanced countries, there has never been a case where they did not come out in support of trade liberalization and multilateral trade. So this is quite a break. On the other hand, because of the promises that Trump has made during his campaign, it's going to seem very strange to his supporters if during the campaign he said America is going to protect its markets when necessary, and then just come right out and then just completely change his views by saying, well, we'll support free trade and no protectionism. So in terms of PR, it's certainly understandable. Problem is, where will we go from here? Because other than withdrawing from the TPP agreement, the Trump administration is not really doing anything about trade yet. They're occupied with other domestic policies.
But then what impact do you think this could have on Korean exports from here on out, which have been on a a recovery track for the past couple of months.
Okay, well, it's interesting that the United States was the one that refused the statement. All the 19 other economies apparently wanted that statement fairly badly, but it was because of the U.S. opposition that it didn't get on. And the interesting thing is, at least looking at it from the Korea's point of view, if you look at the trade for the first 2 months of this year, Korean exports has gone up, but it's mostly exports to China and not to the United States. The exports to the United States for the first 2 months of this year is roughly similar to first 2 months of last year.
Okay.
But the United States imports from the United States, so that would be exports from the United States, has gone up substantially. So the bilateral trade deficit has fallen considerably. And to start a trade dispute while it's the trend is that the United States is getting better, does seem a bit strange.
Now, next month is also when the U.S. Treasury Department will release a report on other countries' foreign exchange policies. So were there any mentioning of currency manipulators during the summit? And also, were there any talks over a possible renegotiation of the Korea-U.S. Free Trade Agreement?
Okay, I think the Vice Minister Yu did meet with the U.S. Treasury Secretary Mnuchin, but nothing concrete came out of it. And I think that's, at least for the currency manipulation, that's somewhat understandable because, well, the Treasury Secretary doesn't want anything to undermine his people who are preparing the report. But there has been no reports yet that they've changed the standards that they determined currency manipulator.
Okay.
And last report, Korea had 2 out of those 3 conditions. And it's most likely that those, if the conditions have not changed, then Korea will be stuck in the same situation this year.
On a watch list.
Yes, on the watch list, 2 out of 3 conditions. And all the policy attention for the Trump administration and the Republican majority in Congress is paying attention to changes in their healthcare policy, their budget, and tax cut. So right now, all their attentions are engaged there. So we don't quite know what the President Trump's actual concrete trade policy will be. There's been rumbling about renegotiating NAFTA, but we don't know how they're going to change NAFTA because they haven't said anything.
Now, shifting our focus a little bit, as if reflecting the strained relationship between Korea and China over the deployment of THAAD, Chinese finance minister refused to meet Korea's finance minister on the sidelines of the G20 summit, I hear.
Yeah, and there's really no incentive for the Chinese finance minister to meet with Korean finance minister to discuss this issue, because what China wants to do is, as long as they see a chance of succeeding in trying to get Korea to withdraw THAAD, they're going to keep up the pressure.
Right.
And I don't think any kind of diplomatic initiative is going to help very much as long as China thinks that it has a chance of making Korea withdraw. Now, having said that, I think Korea should seriously consider filing a case in the WTO, not necessarily because we think we'll win. We think we're in the right. China is keeping to the letter of the agreement, not necessarily to the spirit. But Korea has to prove that the Chinese government is picking on Korea. It's discriminating against Korean goods and service providers particularly, and they've been careful not trying to do that. So it'll be very difficult to prove that in the court of WTO law, but there's a court of law and there's a court of public opinion. And because China is in sensitive position in economic diplomacy right now, because, well, in G20 they were the strongest advocate of free trade, but a lot of European countries as well as other countries were worried that China would use its domestic industrial policy and subsidies to try to build up its companies and then use free trade rhetoric to try to take over global markets. And they're also trying to counter Trump's protectionism. So because of those type of factors, China is in a very vulnerable right now diplomatically in terms of economic trade policy. So it might be Korea can perhaps use that as a leverage if it files with the WTO, even if we may lose.
All right. So then with no clear solutions from the G20 in regards to many of the economic challenges faced by the Korean economy right now, what are your thoughts on the government drawing up a supplementary budget to prevent economic stagnation?
I think we'll need a supplementary budget even if the exports go well.
Okay.
Increase in exports and supplementary budget does different things. And increase in exports will be helpful to the companies, exporting companies, but right now the United States is practically the only country which is doing very well. There's signs that perhaps other countries are starting to recover, but so far it hasn't shown very much in our export figures to some regions other than China. So we need to count on exports anyway, but in order to increase domestic consumption, we do need the supplementary budget.
All right. Thank you so much for your insight today.
Thank you.
And that brings us to the end, but we'll be back tomorrow with more of the day's top business stories, so don't forget to tune in then. Thanks for watching and see you soon.